The classroom reeked of dust, ink, and sweat. The rusted ceiling fan squeaked lazily as it spun overhead, barely pushing air around the suffocating room. Amara sat on the last bench by the window, her faded school uniform clinging to her thin frame. Her skin glistened under the weight of the heat and shame. Her books were secondhand, her sandals stitched together with thread, and her lunch was always Gary and groundnuts. Yet her eyes held a silent brilliance, the kind that made teachers pause and wonder how a girl from such poverty could write with such elegance. Local champion, Ngozi sneered as she strutted past Amara's desk, her pleated skirt perfectly ironed, her perfume choking the air. Bread girl, has your mother sold enough loaves for your school fees this term? The class erupted in laughter. Chike, the school's loudest boy, grinned as he smacked his locker with mock applause. Make sure you share some of your brain with us in exams, Amara, since you've got nothing else to offer. She forced her eyes back to her notebook, swallowing her humiliation like bitter medicine. Despite the daily ridicule, Amara never missed a day. She woke at 4 a.m., helped her mother hawk bread in dusty traffic, and arrived at school just in time to catch the first bell. Her dreams were not written in glitter or makeup. They were etched in every page of her worn-out chemistry and biology textbooks. When her teacher once asked the class what they wanted to be, Amara whispered, "A doctor or a nurse. I want to help people who have no one." The class snickered, but the teacher nodded, moved by something deeper. That afternoon, Amara sat under the almond tree beside the football field, quietly solving past questions while the others gossiped about fashion, boys, and Instagram likes. She had no phone, no makeup, no allies, only her dreams. Yet she never allowed the mockery to shift her focus. She didn't realize that from behind a cracked window, someone was watching her. Chike. Chike mocked her the loudest, but something about Amara unsettled him. Maybe it was how her eyes never wavered, how her answers always silenced the class, or how she could solve the hardest math problems while still smelling of acrid smoke and poverty. He knew she didn't belong among them, but not in the way they meant. She was different, dangerous, real. Unlike Ngozi, who bragged about her uncle's house in London, Amara didn't need to try. She just was. And maybe that frightened Chike more than he would admit. So instead of admiration, he wore mockery like a mask. After all, he had a reputation to protect. He was the prince of the school, the boy every girl giggled over. He couldn't afford to be seen talking to the bread girl with dreams. There were moments Chike couldn't explain, moments that chipped away at his pride. Like when Amara beat him in physics, even though he had been secretly taking lessons. Or when the school principal posted her essay on the bulletin board, calling it a work of art from a soul raised by struggle. Chike began to watch her from afar, how she walked, how she never talked unless asked, how she seemed to float past insults like she was coated in dignity. He saw her once crying behind the water tank, clutching a letter, probably another reminder her school fees were due. But instead of offering help, he turned away. It was easier to mock her with Ngozi than to acknowledge the ache she stirred in him. Ngozi was loud, flashy, predictable, and rich. Loving Amara would have required too much truth. So he let himself fall deeper into the comfort of shallow admiration for Ngozi, where no one expected him to feel deeply. But the crush refused to die. During the inter-house sports, when Amara's house won the relay race and she stood at the edge of the field catching her breath, her head tilted back and her eyes closed, Chike felt something strange in his chest. Not lust, not pride, something soft, something like regret. He had written her name in the corner of his notebook once, then scribbled over it furiously when his friend saw it. "You? Amara? That local girl that smells like beans and Vicks?" The boy laughed. The fear of mockery was greater than the truth of his feelings. So Chike buried the crush, deeper, colder. He told himself she didn't matter. He teased her more, louder. He let Ngozi humiliate her with cruel jokes and joined in with crueler laughter. And every time Amara flinched, a part of him twisted inside, a part he never showed. Amara, for her part, noticed the contradictions. Chike would sometimes pause too long when handing her test paper. He'd defend her answer when a teacher doubted it. But then, he'd go back to mocking her the next day. She once caught him staring at her from behind the library shelf. Their eyes met. For a second, it felt like a truce. But he turned and walked away like nothing happened. She gave up trying to understand him. Her heart had no space for confusion. It was already heavy with hunger, survival, and the burden of expectations. She made a silent vow. Once she finished WEC, she would disappear from this place. She would become something no one saw coming. Not for revenge, but for freedom. The day of graduation came like a quiet ending to a long, sad novel. The sun was cruel that afternoon. Students wore their best clothes, took selfies with teachers, danced to loud music blaring from hired speakers. Amara stood quietly under the mango tree, a brown envelope clutched tightly to her chest. Her WAC result and a letter from a small missionary nursing school in Bainway. She had gotten in. Her fees were paid by a donor who had read one of her essays through a teacher's recommendation. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need the noise. She had bought a second-hand travel bag with her last savings and planned to leave the next morning. No farewell party. No goodbye pictures. Just silence. As always, Chike scanned the crowd for her. He had heard she might be leaving, but he didn't know when. Something restless gnawed at him. Maybe it was the thought of her never returning. Maybe it was the look in her eyes that last time he saw her, calm, final. He found her sitting on the back steps behind the science lab, staring into the clouds. "So this is it?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Yes. He waited, but she didn't speak again. There was no apology, no attempt to mend the years of mockery. Only silence. Chike hesitated, then handed her a note, folded neatly. "Just in case you want to, I don't know, write or something." Amara took it gently, looked at him once, not with hate, but with nothing. And that nothing cut deeper than any insult she had ever endured. By the time school resumed the following term, Amara was gone. No one really noticed. No one asked. Chike kept the note she never replied to, tucked inside his old chemistry textbook. He told himself it didn't matter. He had Ngozi now. He had a life to build. But on nights when Legos heat pressed too tightly against his chest and the sound of rain hit the roof like judgment, he remembered her, the girl with tired eyes and a mind that never broke, not even when the world did. And somewhere in the corner of his soul, he wondered what would become of her. Years later, inside a dimly lit emergency ward in a government hospital in Lagos, the smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat and sorrow. Chike sat on a cracked plastic chair, wincing and clutching his arm after a minor Okada accident. His teaching job barely paid enough for a proper hospital, and he had used his last 2,000 Nigerian nairas to get there. The doctor on duty hadn't yet arrived, but a nurse moved swiftly through the hallway, her quiet presence cutting through the noise. Slim, dark-skinned, with her hair packed in a plain puff and eyes that no longer shone with hunger but something unreadable. She stopped when she saw him. Chike looked up, dazed. He blinked twice. "Amara," he whispered. Her name felt strange on his tongue, heavy with a past he had buried. She paused, gave a soft nod. "Good evening, Mr. Obi." No emotion, just protocol. And that stung more than rejection. He had imagined their reunion differently. Maybe she'd smile, maybe she'd ask how life turned out for him. But here she was, barely acknowledging the crack in his pride. As the days passed, Chike returned for dressing changes, and Amara became his assigned nurse. She did her job well, always gentle but distant. It puzzled him, how someone he used to taunt had become someone so unreachable. She didn't talk about herself. When he asked how she got into nursing, she simply replied, "Through grace and sleepless nights." Something about that answer haunted him. He tried to impress her with tales of how he now taught secondary school science, how he once won Best Youth Educator at his church. She listened, smiled slightly, and continued taking his vitals. But the more he visited, the more a strange sense of shame began to swell in him. He watched her clean wounds of children, comfort dying mothers, joke softly with old patients, and he realized that she had become everything he wasn't. She had turned her suffering into something sacred. She had grown, and he had merely survived. Eventually, he stopped making excuses and told her the truth, how life after school had been hard, how jobs were scarce, how he sometimes went days without proper food. Something in Amara softened that day. Perhaps it was the boy beneath the man's tired skin. Perhaps it was nostalgia. Or maybe it was forgiveness, silent and reluctant. They started to talk more. He walked her to the junction after her shift. He carried her bag one rainy evening. Then came the apology, hesitant, awkward, but real. "I was stupid back then," he said. "You deserved better." Amara looked at him, studied his face, and said nothing. But 2 weeks later, she agreed to have Sunday rice with him at a buka behind the hospital. A month after that, he came to see her mother. She didn't have much, a one-room apartment, a sick back, and eyes full of warnings. But she gave her blessing. And so Amara became his wife. Quietly, without a wedding gown or crowd. Just a small court registry, 2 rings, and hope. Hope that maybe he had changed. The first few months of marriage felt like an uneasy peace treaty. Amara poured herself into making their one-bedroom flat livable. She cooked, washed, cleaned, supported him even when he came home moody and distant. Chaik had just started working in a mid-tier logistics company through a former classmate of Amara's, who owed her a favor. She didn't say much about it, just handed him the contact and prayed. When he got the job, his pride returned with full force. New shirts, cologne, WhatsApp group chats with work colleagues. And among them, one name came up again, Ngozi. The same Ngozi, daughter of his company's chairman, now interning under her father's watch. She was everything Amara wasn't. Loud, fashionable, and unapologetically flirtatious. One day, after a company retreat, Chaik came back smelling of perfume Amara didn't own. When she asked softly, "Did you enjoy yourself?" he replied, "Don't start." And that was the first crack. Ngozi hadn't changed much, still had a mouth that could cut through stone, but now it was coated in lipstick and dripping with entitlement. She called Amara "your housekeeper" to Chaik's face during one of their late lunches. He laughed, not to defend Amara, but to keep Ngozi interested. She bought him a new phone for work, transferred data to support his hustle, and hinted at helping him rise faster if he stayed available. At first, Chaik hesitated, but soon his pride blurred into greed. Amara noticed the signs: locked phones, long calls in the bathroom, sudden unavailability on weekends. But she said nothing. Not yet. One Saturday evening, she came to his office unannounced with a flask of jollof rice, only to see him stepping out of his boss's SUV, shirt unbuttoned, Ngozi laughing beside him. Amara stood at the corner like a stranger. When he saw her, Chaik's face fell. Ngozi raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "Oh, I didn't know the maid came here, too." Amara turned around and walked away. She didn't cry. She just kept the flask on the ground, untouched. At home, Chaik didn't bother explaining. Instead, he slammed the door and shouted, "You embarrassed me at my workplace. What were you thinking showing up like that?" Amara only stared at him. Her silence was starting to offend him more than words. He called her cold, manipulative, boring. "Ngozi makes me feel alive." You just exist," he shouted. That night, he didn't come home. By morning, the marriage had changed. He came and went as he pleased. She ate alone, slept alone, prayed alone. She would sit on the floor by the bed, holding her Bible, whispering to a God she wasn't sure was listening. One night, while he was out, she wrote a letter and hid it inside his Bible. Letter 1. Then another the next day. Letter 2. She would keep writing. One for every bruise, one for every insult, one for every kick. The week Chaik stopped coming home entirely was the week the power went out for 3 straight days. The heat was unbearable. Amara sat on the floor by the open window, fanning herself with a church bulletin. Her face looked older, not from age, but from grief that had settled deep into her skin. She cooked, but the food rotted. She texted, but got no replies. One night he returned, drunk, sweaty, and smelling like cheap perfume. He barely looked at her as he staggered to the fridge, kicked it in anger, and yelled, "There's nothing in this house again. I'm tired of this nonsense." When she tried to hold his arm to calm him, He shoved her so hard she hit her shoulder on the doorframe. The pain was blinding, but she didn't scream. She just slid to the floor, numb. That was the first physical blow. It wouldn't be the last. By the end of that week, he had slapped her twice, kicked her once, each time blaming stress, work, her coldness. She kept writing letters. Number 10. Number 11. One day, she fainted at work. Her matron, a kind widow named Mama Ebel, drove her home and was horrified by what she saw. The bruises, the broken chair, the fridge with nothing inside. "You can't stay here again, Amara," she said. But Amara shook her head. "I'm not done yet," she whispered. Mama Ebel didn't understand. But she left her with a bottle of balm and a silent promise. "When you're ready to leave, call me." That night, Chike came back and found the bomb. "So you're showing people now, eh? You want to disgrace me," he barked, dragging her by the wrapper. She didn't fight, just fell to the floor, curled into herself. Letter 17. Letter 18. The next morning, she could barely move. But she still made him yam porridge before he left. "You better learn to respect me, Amara. I'm not one of those street boys," he spat before slamming the door. That was the 20th kick. The neighbors heard, but said nothing. Lagos is too loud for silence to matter. One woman whispered to another, "That nurse girl, she day endure." Another said, "Maybe not her mouth sharp. Men no day beat for nothing." But Amara knew better. She kept her bruises hidden, and her faith buried under her bed. Each time he left, she stared at her bag. A small black duffel with nothing but her ID, 12,000 Nigerian nairas in savings and the letters. 25 now. She kissed her mother's picture and said, "One day, Mama, he'll regret everything." And that day would come sooner than anyone imagined. The air was thick with perfume, pride, and pretense at the company's annual staff party, hosted in a grand hotel hall in Victoria Island. Waiters in crisp uniforms floated through the crowd, carrying trays of puff-puff, samosas, and chilled wine. Chike had been invited not because of his merit, but because of his connection with Ngozi, the chairman's daughter and the latest symbol of nepotism dressed in gold sequins. Amara had pleaded to come just once, to support him. "It's a staff event," she whispered while ironing his shirt. "I can just sit at the back." Chike scoffed. "For what? To embarrass me? With your cheap gown." Her heart dropped, but she kept ironing. Eventually, after 2 hours of begging and quiet tears, he reluctantly agreed. "Fine. Just don't talk to anyone," he grumbled. She wore her one decent Ankara gown and flat slippers. She tied her natural puff into a bun and rubbed Vaseline on her face. In the mirror, she looked tired but hopeful. As they entered the venue, Chike walked ahead, leaving her to trail behind like a forgotten handbag. The moment Ngozi spotted them, her lips curled. She made her way to them with a calculated sway and said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Ah, you brought your house help to the event?" Guests laughed. Amara froze. Chike chuckled nervously, trying to minimize the scene, but Ngozi wasn't done. "Or wait, this is the nurse you married, right? The one who looks like a market woman." Amara's lips trembled. She opened her mouth to respond, not in rage, but in dignity. But before she could speak, Ngozi slapped her. A loud, stinging slap across her cheek. Gasps echoed. Someone dropped a glass. Chike stood frozen. Time crawled. Amara held her cheek, blinking in disbelief. Ngozi smirked and said, "Next time, know your place." The silence begged for Chike's voice, for his defense, for something. But all he said was, "Let's go." No apology, no anger, just cowardice. Amara walked out alone. She didn't cry until she reached the road. The security man at the gate looked away, pretending not to see. She waited for a bike, still holding the pain in her cheek like a badge of honor. That night, Chike didn't return. She stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. And then she wrote another letter. Letter 37. "Tonight, I learned that silence can slap harder than hands," she wrote. "And dignity is the bruise that heals last." In that moment, something in her heart began to shift. The forgiveness she once held like a fragile candle was snuffed out. And all that remained was clarity. She knew she had to leave, not just the house, but the life. But she wouldn't run. No, she would vanish with purpose. She would become what they could never imagine. Not for revenge, but for restoration. For her mother. For the little girl she once was. Rain pounded the roof like an angry drummer the night Chike returned, drenched, drunk, and reeking of perfume and cheap whiskey. Amara had packed a small bag earlier in the day. Inside, 15,000 Nigerian nairas in savings, her hospital ID card, and the 42 letters she had written. She didn't know where she was going, but she was going somewhere. Anywhere. But before she could leave, he barged in. "Where are you going?" he slurred, slamming the door behind him. She stood still, clutching her bag. "To breathe," she replied softly. That one sentence ignited him like gasoline. He lunged at her, yanked the bag from her hand, and threw it across the room. "You think you can just leave?" "After everything I've done for you," he screamed. She stepped back, trembling, not in fear, but in mourning. She was watching the final piece of whatever humanity he had left die before her. He accused her of sleeping with someone at the hospital, said she was jealous of Ngozi's miscarriage, called her a witch, cursed her womb, mocked her barren body. His words weren't just cruel. They were surgical, aimed to destroy. She stood in silence, tears streaming. Then came the first kick. To her side. Then another to her stomach. She fell. He didn't stop. Letter 43. Letter 44. Her vision blurred. Her ears rang. He screamed something about Ngozi losing her baby because Amara had cursed them. That was the final blow. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the tiles. Chike stood over her, chest heaving. "If you die, you die," he spat and stormed out, slamming the door. Hours passed. No one came. The rain outside kept falling, as if God himself was too ashamed to intervene. By dawn, she dragged herself to the corner of the room, gripping the wall. She reached for her hidden envelope, tucked behind the curtain rod. It had an address written in trembling handwriting. Mama Ebel's house. She had memorized it weeks ago, with one hand pressed against her bruised ribs and the other holding her letters. She stepped into the rain. The world felt strange, blurred, slow, unfamiliar. No one helped her as she staggered through the street. Maybe they didn't recognize her, or maybe they didn't care. But when she knocked on Mama Ebel's door and collapsed into her arms, she felt a whisper of something she hadn't felt in years: safety. The older woman didn't ask questions, just wept as she bathed her, fed her, and put her to sleep. That night, Amara whispered to the ceiling, "This is the last time I sleep in pain. The next time I return, I will not come back small." Lagos swallowed secrets easily, and Amara became one of them. Word spread slowly that she had left her husband. Some said she died. Some said she ran with a lover. Chike told people she was mentally unstable. Even told Ngozi's father that Amara tried to poison him. No one asked for evidence. No one cared. He moved Ngozi into the house within a month, cleared out Amara's things, and painted the walls white. It was like she had never existed. But in truth, Amara had only gone underground. With the help of Mama Ebel, she changed jobs, moved to another hospital in Abuja, and began again. Quietly, carefully. She worked night shifts, slept on foam, and saved every kobo. Each month, she added to her journal of letters. By letter 71, she no longer wrote to survive. She wrote to document the ashes she would rise from. One rainy night, an elderly patient was wheeled into the emergency unit, barely breathing. A billionaire. Powerful, feared. His children refused to sign consent forms. He should rest, one of them said. What's the point of prolonging it? But Amara held his hand. She fed him, changed him, prayed for him. And when he recovered weeks later, he asked to see her. "You're the first person who treated me like a human being," he said, his voice weak but sincere. They talked for hours, days. He asked about her past. She didn't lie, but she didn't complain either. Something about her silence moved him. When he died months later, Amara attended his funeral in the back row. A week later, she got a letter. She had been named the sole heir to his personal estate, properties, shares, international accounts. No one understood why, but he had written in his will, She saved me when I was ready to be thrown away. So let her have what they wanted to bury. Amara moved to a quiet estate in Ikoyi. She wore black, spoke little, went by a new name, Amara Okoye Williams. Her hair was longer, her skin clearer, but her eyes, those brown unreadable eyes, carried the weight of 100 kicks and the power of survival. She didn't post online, didn't flaunt. She bought a publishing company and opened a women's health foundation in honor of her late mother. Meanwhile, Chaik's life began to crumble. The logistics firm hit a financial scandal. Ngozi was caught embezzling petty funds. Rumors started flying. Staff were fired. Salaries withheld. And just when things couldn't get worse, a new investor stepped in, quiet, anonymous, female. With one condition, Chaik must remain. But as what? Nobody knew yet. But the woman in the G-Wagon watching from across the street knew. Amara had returned. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. The beginning of Chaik's supposed breakthrough felt like a reward for wickedness. After Amara vanished, he quickly slipped into the lap of luxury with Ngozi, who convinced her father to promote him to manager of the distribution arm. Suddenly, Chaik wore designer shirts, attended conferences in South Africa, and strutted through the office like a crown prince. He bought a Toyota Camry on loan, moved into a bigger flat with polished tiles, and posted motivational quotes on social media. Every trace of Amara, the woman who had trained, fed, and nursed him through his lowest, was wiped from his life like a stain. That girl was holding me back, he often said to colleagues. He didn't mention how she'd once washed his boxers or sold her jewelry to fund his first job interview outfit. He didn't speak of the letters hidden in a Bible he had thrown into the trash the day she left. Ngozi, however, was not a silent partner. She demanded attention, luxury, and flattery like oxygen. She pouted when he didn't post her on Instagram, threatened to call her father when Chaik questioned her purchases, and nagged about marriage every weekend. Chaik, now drunk on his sudden relevance, began pulling away. Let's just enjoy the moment, he said. Ngozi wasn't patient. She wanted a ring, a big wedding, a magazine shoot. When she finally forced an engagement ring out of him, she announced it online without telling him. That was the beginning of cracks. Colleagues whispered behind her back, "She's forcing it. He's just using her." Chaik, meanwhile, had discovered new temptations. Younger girls on TikTok, corporate trips where secrets could stay hidden. He began embezzling small funds, 50,000 Nigerian Nairas here, 100,000 Nigerian Nairas there, to finance his growing appetite. He convinced himself it wasn't theft. It's soft adjustment, he called it. But karma doesn't sleep. A routine audit exposed anomalies in the company books. Whispers became questions. His fake receipts didn't add up. One of his junior staff, a quiet, observant woman, submitted a report directly to the board. At first, Chaik was summoned for a casual clarification. Then, a formal query followed. Then, a 2-week suspension. Ngozi screamed and cursed, blaming everyone but herself. Her father was abroad on medical leave, and the acting board had little patience. There's a new investor stepping in. You better clean your name before then, one of the directors warned. But Chaik was too arrogant, too slow. The same boardroom where he once boasted became the arena where his crown began to burn. And sitting in the shadows of that rising fire was a woman he hadn't seen yet, watching, waiting. The boardroom of Williams Logistics was cold, sleek, and perfumed with tension. Glass panels reflected stiff faces, and bottled water remained untouched. The acting chairman, Mr. Alaba, stood beside a projector screen, announcing the arrival of a mysterious private investor who had agreed to inject a large sum into the company to rescue it from financial collapse. She wishes to remain anonymous, he said, but she has submitted clear terms, full control of project audits, and direct involvement in management review. The board murmured. Is she a competitor? Is she from tech? What's her angle? Mr. Alaba raised his hand. She's already bought 40% of the shares in 6 weeks. If we reject her, we collapse. If we accept her, we survive. Choose wisely. Chaik sat stiffly, adjusting his tie, his heart thudding. He hadn't been formally fired, but he was walking a tightrope. Ngozi was absent. She had locked herself in their bedroom for 3 days since her father's diagnosis worsened. She refused to believe the family empire was shaking. Meanwhile, Chike struggled to sleep. The anonymous investor had left signs, silent ones. He heard rumors from the HR department about a woman who declined to speak much, but paid promptly. Her lawyers were precise. Her conditions strict. Something about the way she signed her emails, AOW, felt haunting. At night, Chike would flip through his drawer, where an old letter from Amara used to sit. It was gone, burned in his foolish pride. Now he found himself dreaming of her, not the woman he abused, but the girl from the back row of his chemistry class. The girl who once wrote a love poem he laughed at. What Chike didn't know was that the silent sponsor had already begun restructuring the company's culture. Toxic managers were removed. Female staff promoted. Even the cleaners got a raise. A new HR system was installed, and one particular file was created. Chike Obi, historical record. The new sponsor had demanded every disciplinary file, every audit sheet, and even access to internal CCTV logs. Her team watched everything. Not to expose. Not yet. But to understand. When you know how a man climbs, she once said to her assistant, you'll understand how hard he must fall to learn. Amara Okoye-Williams never made noise. But her silence was thunderous. She didn't come to fight. She came to reclaim. And the first step was simple. Make him comfortable in the burning house he built. It began with a missing 250,000 Nigerian Heirs, expense voucher filed under client gifts. The finance team flagged it. When Ngozi was asked, she laughed. I'm the boss's daughter. Do I need permission to spend change? But the company's new silent sponsor had zero tolerance for informal entitlement. A fresh audit was launched. Within days, 2.3 million Nigerian Heirs in frivolous expenses were traced back to Ngozi. Spa days, wigs, shopping receipts, and payments to influencers for an engagement party she hosted secretly. The board moved quickly. Temporary suspension, they called it. Ngozi screamed, threatened lawsuits, called her father's lawyer, but her father was too ill to intervene. The new investor was unmoved. If her name isn't cleared, she's out permanently, the email stated. Chike tried to mediate. He went to the board, pleaded. She's just misunderstood. She didn't mean harm. But the board's patience had run out. She treated the company like a toy, one said. She's a liability, another muttered. When Ngozi received the official termination letter, she tore it to pieces and accused Chike of betraying her. You dragged me into this company. You made me believe we were untouchable, she screamed, throwing his phone at the wall. This is your fault. If you had kept your accounts clean, I'd still have leverage. Chike stood in silence, his face pale. The cracks in their illusionary empire had widened. And for the first time, he began to see what Amara must have felt all those nights, alone, bruised, humiliated, and unheard. That evening, Ngozi packed her things and left. No goodbye. No kiss. Just slammed doors and bitter curses. Chike sat alone in the now dark flat, the once glamorous living room now cluttered with unpaid bills, worn curtains, and silence. His stomach rumbled, but there was no food. The account was frozen. His car was repossessed. He tried calling old friends. No one picked up. He walked to the mirror, saw himself, tired, aging, lost. He whispered Amara's name, not in guilt, but in yearning. Where are you? He asked the silence. And far away, in a quiet office overlooking the Lekki Bridge, Amara Okoye-Williams signed a new approval. She had one more step to take before the final unveiling. But before that, she wanted to see him. Just once. Broken. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. The sun had begun to set behind the Lagos skyline when Chike noticed her. He was standing under the bridge at Aja, waiting for a Kiki to take him home after walking 5 long kilometers, because he could no longer afford Uber or even public taxis. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his face was weary, not just from the heat, but from life. He glanced at the black G-Wagon that pulled up slowly beside the traffic light. The windows were tinted, but as the light shifted, the driver's side glass lowered slightly. Behind it sat a woman, elegant, dark-skinned, hair packed in a flawless puff, adorned in a minimalist cream gown, her face calm, unreadable. Her eyes met his. Something in them struck him like lightning. He blinked. She looked away. The car pulled off. And in that strange, suspended moment, his breath caught. He couldn't shake the encounter. For hours, even days afterward, her face haunted him. Her expression wasn't unfamiliar, but it wasn't friendly either. It was quiet, like a page that had been turned and closed. Something about her jawline, the way her hand had rested on the wheel, the arch of her brows, it clawed at his memory. Where do I know her from? He murmured to himself, flipping through old mental files. And then it hit him, Amara. But it wasn't possible. The Amara he remembered wore hospital slippers and bust to work. The Amara he knew didn't drive G-Wagons or wear pearls with silence. This woman was different, polished, powerful, untouchable. And yet those eyes, those same eyes that used to blink back tears beneath dim light bulbs, now stared at him through glass with something colder than hatred. Indifference. Restless, Chike began asking questions at the office. Who's the new investor? Has anyone seen her? But no one had. Only her team. Only her signed documents. He started going through old emails and stumbled upon the initials, AOW. His heartbeat quickened. Amara Okoye Williams? It couldn't be. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark, alone, thinking of all the times he had kicked her, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. He remembered the last time he saw her curled on the floor, bleeding, and how he walked away like she was dirt. Now the thought that she had not just survived, but risen, and might be the same woman behind his fall, drove him mad. He wept, not out of guilt, but out of dread. What would she do now? Would she expose him? Jail him? Humiliate him the way he once humiliated her? And yet something inside told him, she doesn't need to do any of that. You're already ruined. The boardroom was full that morning. Everyone had been summoned for a strategic restructuring meeting with the company's largest shareholder. Whispers filled the air like smoke. She's coming, person? I heard she's very private. Maybe she's coming to fire the whole executive team. Chike sat at the edge of the conference table, sweating. He had barely slept, his tie was crooked, and his mind was spinning with anxiety. Then the room fell silent. The door opened. High heels echoed across the marble. The woman walked in, poised, calm, eyes forward. Amara. Every breath in the room seemed to stop. She wore a fitted navy blue suit, her hair packed high in a sleek puff, a gold necklace resting just below her collarbone. Her face bore no expression. She walked to the head of a table and sat down. Chike couldn't move. His lips parted slightly. It was her. The woman he once mocked for her accent. The woman he married, beat, and abandoned. Sitting now, as the most powerful person in the room. He wanted to melt into the floor. Good morning, she said, her voice steady. I am Amara Okoye Williams. I'll keep this short. She clicked the remote and a presentation appeared, clear, precise, brutal. Within minutes, she laid out the future of the company. Tighter controls, stricter audits, new leadership, and a review of all disciplinary cases. This company has been mismanaged, abused, and used as a personal playground for too long, she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. That era ends today. She didn't mention names. She didn't look at Chike. But he felt every word like a stone thrown at his ribs. After the meeting, people approached her, congratulating, flattering, introducing themselves. She nodded politely, took no numbers, made no promises. When she rose to leave, her eyes met Chike's for a brief moment. He tried to speak, but her gaze silenced him. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply nothing. And nothing, he realized, was more painful than hate. It meant she had moved past him, that she didn't see him as a threat, or even as someone worth hurting. She walked out of the room, leaving behind murmurs and shock. Chike sank back into his chair, trembling. Everything he had built on deceit was collapsing, and the woman he left bleeding on the floor was the one now sweeping the ruins clean, not with vengeance, but with elegance. Amara stood in her private study, holding the brown leather-bound journal in her hands, the one she had written the first letter in. the one she had carried through every shadow of her suffering. She opened it to letter 45. The ink had run a little from the rain the night she fled, but the words were still visible. I do not hate you. I pity what you will become when you realize what you lost while you were trying to climb over me. She sighed. Her fingers traced the edges of the pages as her mind drifted to the clinic in Bainway, the one where she had met Chief Williams. The man had come in unconscious, abandoned by his children who were too busy contesting over his properties. Amara had fed him, bathed him, even sat with him through the night when no one came. He had called her daughter the second week. She thought it was delirium, but later she realized it was destiny. Chief Williams had no real family left. He saw in Amara what no one else had ever seen: dignity beneath scars. They talked about life, regrets, and legacies. One day he asked her, "What would you do if the world gave you a second chance to become more than what they ever expected?" She didn't answer, but he must have seen something in her eyes. When he passed, she was called in for the reading of the will. Amara Okoye, nurse and caregiver, hereby receives, the words blurred. The entire room had gasped. His children protested, lawyers fought, but it held. The estate, the shares, the overseas properties, all to her. It wasn't money. It was justice. Silent, stunning, legal justice. She disappeared after that, changed her name, rebuilt herself from scratch, learned to speak like investors, dressed like power. But she never forgot. Not the pain, not the kicks, not the girl who once slept on the floor of a one-room apartment with bruises on her face and dreams in her chest. She closed the diary, walked to the bookshelf, and placed it in a box labeled closure. She had returned, not to gloat, but to close the circle. She would not sue Chike. She would not expose Ngozi. Their destruction was already underway, crafted by their own hands. She didn't need revenge. Her life now was the revenge. The peace, the power, the ability to heal others. That was her justice. That night, she wrote one more letter. Letter 100. This is the last one. I'm done bleeding for you. You no longer live in my mind. You no longer own my story. Goodbye. Then she sealed the diary, placed it in the safe, and went to bed. For the first time in years, she slept like someone who had finally come home. The walls were closing in on Chike. It wasn't just the financial collapse, the social humiliation, or the loss of Ngozi. It was the realization that he was no longer the man he once imagined himself to be. Days after Amara's boardroom appearance, he stopped leaving his house altogether. The once proud man who used to wear cologne and flaunt his fitted shirts in front of office mirrors now wore oversized boxers and a faded singlet stained with palm oil and sweat. His phone had stopped ringing. Friends avoided him. Former colleagues blocked him. Even the gatekeeper at the estate he used to live in now ignored his greetings. But what haunted him most was the look Amara had given him, or rather, the look she didn't. That cold, unreadable glance had stripped him of every ounce of remaining pride. He couldn't forget it. Not at night. Not even in his dreams. When he finally worked up the courage to go to her new company headquarters in Ikoyi, he wasn't expecting much, maybe a security escort, maybe shame. But what he saw shook him. Amara's name was carved into the marble entrance. The Okoye Williams Foundation for Women and Children. Pictures of her in medical scrubs, feeding orphans, and donating supplies were framed along the hallways. Her staff wore customized uniforms, and her office overlooked the water. The receptionist didn't recognize him. When he mentioned his name, she frowned. "You'll have to book an appointment, sir." But as he turned to leave, Amara herself stepped out of the elevator. Silence gripped the air. She looked regal, untouched, glowing. And in that moment, the weight of everything he had thrown away hit him. He dropped to his knees, in front of her staff, the receptionist, the cameras. He began to sob. "Amara, please. I'm sorry." But Amara didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him and said, "You're on your knees now, but I was on the floor for years. And no one helped me up." Her voice was soft, not angry, just final. "Go home, Chike. There's nothing here for you." He clutched her leg. Please, even if it's just to hear me out. I'll sweep the floor. She stepped back, gently freeing herself. You don't need to be punished. You've already been sentenced. By your own choices. Then she turned and walked away. The receptionist stared at him, stunned. One of the staff whispered, "That's her ex-husband?" Chike stood slowly, his knees shaking. For the first time, he realized he had not just lost a woman. He had lost a destiny. And not even the ground wanted to catch him. Later that week, Chike returned to the old house they once shared, now abandoned and stripped. The windows were broken, the walls peeling. He wandered through the rooms like a ghost, his hands brushing against old memories. He found the kitchen tile where Amara once slipped while carrying water. He found the wardrobe that still had one of her wrappers tucked into a corner. And then, inside the back of the broken cupboard where he had thrown her Bible years ago, he found it, wrapped in black nylon, dusty but intact. A diary. He opened it. Letter 1. Today you said I was useless because there was no salt in the house. I cried in the bathroom so you wouldn't hear me. I forgave you. His hands trembled. Letter 2. You kicked me today for asking about your phone. I wrote your name in my tears. On and on it went. He sat on the floor and read until the sun set. Each letter a scream in silence. Letter 24. Letter 36. Letter 50. Tonight you didn't hit me, but you slept in another room. That was worse. The letters weren't just painful, they were art. Emotional, raw, and written with the hands of a woman who had tried to survive in a house that never loved her back. By the time he reached letter 100, his eyes were swollen. This is the last one. Tomorrow I'm leaving. If I live, thank God. If I die, forgive me. But I will not stay here to rot for a man who never saw me. Chike collapsed onto the floor, the diary pressed to his chest. He wept like a child, not just for what he had done, but for the fact that he didn't know then what he was holding. A woman who was gold. A heart that was art. He stayed in the house that night, with nothing but the diary as a pillow. The rain came again, leaking through the zinc. It was as if the sky wept with him. And in that moment he made a vow. If I ever get the chance to stand in front of her again, I won't beg. I won't explain. I'll just kneel, not for pity, but for forgiveness I'll never deserve. The next morning, he carried the diary to Amara's gate. He left it there, wrapped in white cloth, with a note. I read them all. I carry them now. You no longer need to. Then he walked away barefoot. No hope of return. Just the weight of everything he never read when it mattered. Weeks passed. Amara didn't reach out to him, but she saw the diary. Her assistant handed it to her with raised eyebrows. She didn't cry. She didn't open it. She placed it gently inside a drawer and whispered, "Let it rest." But the past had stirred something else inside her, a final move, not of revenge, but of poetic closure. She called her legal team. "Is the school still on auction?" she asked. They confirmed. Her old secondary school, the place where she had been called bread girl, mocked for her accent, slapped with shame, was bankrupt and up for sale. She smiled slightly. Buy it, quietly, and renamed the science block. Within 2 weeks, the papers were signed. The principal, a much older man now, invited her to an alumni event without knowing she was the new owner. She attended, dressed in white, regal, elegant. The hall was full of old classmates. Some recognized her, wide-eyed. Others whispered, "Isn't that Amara? Didn't she disappear after school?" She didn't explain. She simply sat quietly. When she was called to speak, she walked to the stage and took the mic. Once upon a time, a girl sat in this room and was told she would never amount to anything. She was called bread girl, laughed at for her slippers, mocked for her silence. But today, I stand here to say, pain does not mean weakness, and silence does not mean surrender. The crowd fell into stunned silence. I bought this school, and I will keep it alive, but not to gloat. I'm doing it for the next girl who sits where I once sat, the one who hides her dreams behind her tears. Let her know she matters. Then she turned to the projector and clicked the next slide, the Amara Okoye Williams science block. Tears filled the room. Even the old teachers stood in silence. She walked out without applause. That evening, a former classmate texted Chike, "Amara bought the school." He stared at the message, numb. Then he smiled bitterly and said to himself, "She became everything I mocked. And I became everything I feared." He opened his phone gallery and scrolled to an old photo, the one Amara had taken of him years ago, holding his first work ID card, beaming with pride. He stared at it and deleted it. He no longer recognized the man in the picture. That man had died the day he kicked gold and called it dirt. And now the world knew. The same girl who once walked barefoot across the assembly ground had returned. Not to make noise, but to plant her name in marble. The building stood tall in Victoria Island, painted white and gold, with banners that read, "Okoye Williams Foundation, restoring dignity, one life at a time." Inside, women queued with silent stories, survivors of abuse, abandoned mothers, teenage girls fleeing trafficking. Amara had built more than a company. She had built a haven. Her office overlooked the courtyard, where girls were taught basic healthcare, sewing, computer skills, and dignity. She hired only women for executive roles, trained nurses from poor communities, and sponsored scholarships for girls who once looked like her. But this day was different. A new staff orientation had been approved. Security personnel were to be recruited. Her head of HR had done the interviews. Amara had not reviewed the names until now. She opened the file. Second page. Security assistant. Chike Obi. She paused. Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from irony. He had applied without knowing the organization was hers. He was assigned to the warehouse side of the building, where deliveries were received. A role that paid 70,000 Nigerian nairas monthly. No bonuses. No glamour. Just a branded uniform and a badge. Amara stared at the photo attached to his application. His face had aged. His eyes were tired. There was no arrogance in his posture anymore, just resignation. She didn't call for his removal. She didn't summon him to her office. She let the universe continue what it had started. Quietly, poetically. One afternoon, Amara walked through the courtyard, inspecting logistics. She passed by Chike without slowing down. He stood by the fence, hands behind his back, sweat clinging to his shirt. He looked up. Their eyes met for the second time since the boardroom. He didn't speak. He didn't kneel. He simply nodded. She gave the faintest nod back and continued walking. No words. No drama. Just silence. That night, Chike sat under the security shed, reading a book one of the girls had dropped. The cover read, "Letters Never Read, a collection of survival stories." He opened the first page. It was a letter. He recognized the writing. Amara had published them. Every single one. Not to shame, but to help others heal. He wept. Not out of self-pity, but because for the first time in his life, he understood her pain, and knew he could never undo it. Years passed. Amara's name spread beyond Nigeria. Her foundation won awards. Her face appeared on CNN, Al Jazeera, and local documentaries. But she remained the same, humble, quiet, and purposeful. She still drove herself. She still greeted her cleaners by name. She never remarried. Not because she was bitter, but because her soul had found something deeper than romance. It had found peace. One evening, after giving a lecture at the University of Ibadan on silent strength in a loud world, a young girl approached her. "Ma," she said, "they used to call me trash girl at school. But I read your story. I read your letters. And now, I want to be a nurse." Amara's lips curled softly. "Good," she replied. "Help someone. That's how we heal." Back in Lagos, Chike still worked at the foundation. He never asked for more. Never spoke to Amara again. But he changed. He started helping the younger boys coming in as security. He taught them respect. How to listen. He never spoke of his past. But every time a woman passed through the gate, he bowed slightly, not just in protocol, but in penance. He was no longer the man who needed to be feared. He was the man who learned too late. One morning, he found an envelope in the break room. No name, no sender, just a note. Poetic justice is not punishment. It is understanding. A. Inside was his last salary and a small certificate of appreciation. He cried for hours that night. Amara stood on the rooftop of the foundation building, watching the sun set. Her assistant came up. "Ma, CNN wants a deeper interview. They want the drama." Amara smiled faintly and shook her head. "I'm not a story. I'm a page turned." She walked back inside, picked up her old journal from the shelf, and finally burned it. Not in anger, but in closure. And as the pages turned to ash, the last words could still be faintly seen. "Pain taught me how to speak. Silence taught me how to roar. And now I rest. Not because they stopped, but because I outgrew them." Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.